about what happened that night. Nothing. I did not have anything to do with George's death.
Okay.
And definitely nothing dealing with him, wanting him dead for money. Nothing.
That means one person on that jury felt enough sympathy, mercy for you that they decided that you did not deserve the death penalty.
In a world where family is supposed to be a protective and safe haven, some have turned it into a deadly nightmare. From Adam Matos' brutal murders driven by betrayal to Chandler Halderson's chillingly twisted motives, their stories will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about trust, love, and the darkest depths of human nature. Let's begin.
Did you kill him?
Yes.
Why?
He tried to kill me.
Did Gregory Brown threaten your life?
Yes,
with a
he
rifle? Did he pull the trigger?
Yes.
On August 28, 2014, Adam Matos was arrested after a horrifying crime that left everyone deeply unsettled. He was charged with the brutal murders of his ex-girlfriend, Megan Brown, her parents, and her new boyfriend. The details of the case were horrifying, as Matos shot and beat all 4 victims before leaving his young son alone with their bodies for days. The details of the crime committed by Adam Matos are deeply unsettling. After taking the lives of Megan Brown, her parents, and her new boyfriend, Matos left his 4-year-old son alone with the bodies for several days. Only the young boy was left to witness all the scenes. The child, despite being so young, had vivid memories of the painful events. After the killings, Matos moved the bodies to a berm by the roadside, disturbing them. His actions raised suspicion when he sold the family's dogs on Craigslist and used Megan's credit card to buy pizza after the murders. These strange actions led to further investigation and eventually his arrest.
The body's away from the house. I didn't want Tristan being exposed to all the blood and the bodies and the smell. So I attempted to put them in a bin.
The boy, who had endured an unimaginable trauma, was later taken in by Megan's cousin and her family. Although he was so young, the memories of that day stayed with him. His story became a heartbreaking part of the case, adding to the tragedy that shook the community. Matos' shocking crimes left lasting scars on everyone involved, especially the young child who witnessed it all. During his trial, Adam Matos claimed he acted in self-defense, but the jury wasn't convinced by his explanation. His testimony, which lasted for hours, was all captured on camera and later featured in the What Lies Beneath series. Despite his defense, the jury carefully considered the evidence and found Matos guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that Matos' actions were both shocking and disturbing. His lack of remorse and the coldness he displayed throughout the proceedings made it hard for anyone to believe his claims of self-defense. The details of the case, including his treatment of his young son and the way he disposed of the bodies, left the jury with no doubt about his guilt.
Agonizing process for the victims' families. We spoke with the father of one of them as jurors handed down that verdict. He tells us he feels relief, whether there's a death penalty or not.
In the end, the jury sentenced Matos to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His conviction brought a sense of justice for the victims and their families, though nothing could undo the pain and trauma caused by his crimes. The story of Matos' actions remains a haunting reminder of the devastating impact of violence on innocent lives. Today, Adam Matos remains incarcerated at the Blackwater River Correctional Facility, serving his life sentence. Although he faced the possibility of the death penalty, he narrowly missed it, with 1 juror voting against it. As of 2018, he's 32 years old and continues to serve his sentence in Florida.
Decision of the jury, I sentence you in count 1 and count 4 to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
This case left many shaken, especially considering the young child who witnessed the murders. The emotional toll on the family and the public has been immense. The fact that Matos managed to escape the death penalty only adds to the heartbreak, as the severity of his crime seems to warrant a much harsher punishment. The story is a chilling reminder of how far some individuals will go for selfish reasons and the lasting trauma they leave behind.
That he lost the hands of a murderer. He loves his mother, he loves his grandparents, and he loves us. He does not love you. You stole his whole world. You ruined his whole life, and we are here to pick up the pieces.
Adam Matos left a young child scarred by the horrors he committed, but the next case takes betrayal to a whole new level.
She began to add things that didn't make sense. When we spoke with Tim, it was the same thing. The story was not the same about when they saw each other. Now he had done things that he hadn't mentioned before.
On November 6, 2017, George Young was shot and killed outside his home in Beaufort, Georgia. His wife, Tia Young, had just lost her husband of 22 years, the father of their 3 children, in what seemed like a random act of violence. Tia appeared heartbroken, and her tearful plea for justice was broadcast to the public. She even set up a GoFundMe account to help with funeral expenses. Months after George Young's tragic death, the truth began to unravel unexpectedly. At first, Tia Young's grief seemed genuine as she mourned her husband's loss. However, as the investigation continued, the story took a shocking turn. Police soon arrested Tia and her lover, Harvey Lee, for George's murder. It was revealed that Tia and Harvey had been having an affair, and together they had planned to kill George to claim his $1 million life insurance policy.
He's eliciting hearsay statements.
The defense not holding back on the state's first witness, Young's former boss and friend, Rob Strickland.
He was my go-to guy.
As detectives dug deeper, they found numerous inconsistencies in the stories that Tia and Harvey had been telling. Tia's initial heartbreak and emotional plea for help started to fade, and her behavior became increasingly suspicious. New evidence began to surface, including messages and phone records showing the affair. It became clear that their actions were not those of grieving loved ones, but rather two people involved in a calculated scheme for financial gain. The investigation revealed a web of lies, with Tia and Harvey's actions betraying the trust of a family who believed in their love and loyalty. Their plot, once hidden, was exposed, leaving the community in disbelief over the betrayal and heartbreak that led to George's death. As the trial began, the evidence against Tia and Harvey started to pile up. The jury learned that after George was shot, Tia waited between 5 to 10 minutes before police had come. That alone raised suspicions, as it seemed unusual for a wife to delay reaching out for help after her husband was shot. Investigators also found that the murder weapon was never recovered, and both Tia and Harvey's stories didn't line up. Their accounts had many contradictions, which made it harder for the court to believe their version of events. Further investigation uncovered text messages and photos revealing the affair between Tia and Harvey, exposing the secret they had tried to keep hidden. One of their neighbors even witnessed Harvey tampering with evidence, making it clear that they were trying to cover up their actions. The jury was shocked by how deep the betrayal went.
And I felt like maybe that had something to do with it, but I wasn't sure.
Detectives were stunned.
Tia and Harvey weren't just the grieving spouse and supportive lover they had pretended to be. They were the ones responsible for George's death. The truth was undeniable now. The people who should have loved and protected George were the very ones who plotted his murder for financial gain. Tia and Harvey were both convicted of murder. Tia was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole plus 3 years, while Harvey received a sentence without the chance of parole. But Tia has no remorse for her act. The case was a heartbreaking reminder of the lengths some will go for money and how betrayal can come from those closest to us.
She will spend in prison. A jury found Tia Young guilty of felony murder, aggravated assault. Her alleged lover, Harvey Timothy Lee, was convicted of malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated assault.
The story of George Young's murder left everyone in shock. The woman who cried on camera, pleading for help, was revealed to be behind the death of her husband. The betrayal, lies, and manipulation showed how a family can be torn apart by greed and deceit. It was a tragic and emotional case that raised many questions about trust, love, and the dark side of human nature. Tia's calculated betrayal shocked everyone. The next case shows a tragic fall from a fairy tale romance to murder in the poolside shadows.
Okay. All right. She's laying in the pool?
Yes, ma'am. See, I don't know what happened. I just got here to do some work before I talked to her yesterday, and I'm at 8374 Inverness right now.
On February 22, 2014, a tragic discovery was made in the gated Tallahassee community of Golden Eagle. Samira Frosch, a former French model, was found dead in her backyard pool by a handyman and his young son. Her strappy sandals lay near the pool, one partially submerged in the water. Samira's life had transformed from humble beginnings in Madagascar to a world of glamour and luxury. In 2006, while in Paris, she met Dr. Adam Frosch, a successful podiatrist, and they quickly fell in love. Their connection felt like a fairy tale. Samira thought she had found her Prince Charming as Adam showered her with gifts and affection. Their life together seemed perfect. They got married and had 2 children. Living in Tallahassee, they enjoyed a life filled with expensive cars, lavish vacations, and grand events. Samira even dreamed of creating a children's clothing line with her daughter as the star of the show. They were often seen in public with their daughter, Hyra, dressed in custom outfits and posing for cameras. But behind the glitz and glamour, there were cracks in their marriage. Adam's infidelity and the constant tension between them began to take a toll on their relationship. Samira was no longer willing to ignore the signs and filed for divorce. The separation seemed to be the final straw for Adam. Their once fairy tale romance was unraveling. Just days after the divorce papers were filed, Samira's life came to a tragic and unexpected end in her backyard, leaving everyone shocked.
He had so many other women. He was going to strip clubs.
I dated like 3 different women.
At first, authorities thought Samira's death might have been a tragic accident. Maybe she slipped and fell into the pool. But as investigators looked closer at the scene, things didn't add up. Her sandals were found near the pool, one partially in the water, which seemed strange for someone who had fallen into the pool. The way her body was positioned and the surroundings raised more questions. The medical examiner's report revealed blunt force trauma to Samira's head, along with drowning, showing that her death wasn't an accident, but a case of foul play. The investigation then turned to Adam as they learned more about his troubled past and rocky relationship with Samira. The couple had faced many issues, including Adam's multiple affairs and constant fights over the years. The more they dug, the more investigators found that Adam had a motive, and the evidence began to point to him.
Who advises him that his wife, Kendall, has heard that his wife, Samira Frosch, has been found dead in the pool at the Inverness Drive address.
Surveillance footage showed Adam leaving the house on the morning of Samira's death, but other footage and witness accounts placed him at the scene in ways that raised suspicion. His past actions and the growing tension between him and Samira made investigators believe that Adam was responsible for her tragic death. Investigators pieced together the final moments leading to Samira's death. On the morning of February 22nd, Adam claimed he left for a beach house with their children, but evidence suggested otherwise. Adam was arrested and charged with Samira's murder. Despite his insistence that he loved his wife and would never mistreat her, the jury convicted him of first-degree murder after only 90 minutes of deliberations. He was sentenced to life in prison. While listing his sentence, Adam remained calm and accepted the decision, as if he's not guilty of his act.
I have no discretion other than to impose a life sentence. That's the only legal sentence at this point in time.
The tragic end to Samira's life left behind not only a grieving family, but also a community shaken by the realization that sometimes the people closest to us can harbor the darkest secrets. The case served as a reminder of the hidden struggles that can exist behind closed doors, even in seemingly perfect lives.
I think she was a good mom. She seemed very interested in providing the best life for her children. She had an interesting way of going about that.
Samira's life of glamour ended in heartbreak at the hands of someone she trusted. But the next case shows a son turning on his parents in a horrifying twist of violence.
Did you hear anything back?
No.
And did that concern you?
Yes.
In July 2021, the Halderson family from Windsor, Wisconsin was struck by a tragic and shocking event. Bart and Krista Halderson, a couple with 2 sons, mysteriously vanished. Chandler, their 23-year-old son, reported them missing, claiming they had gone to their cabin for the 4th of July weekend. However, things would soon take a dark turn. As the days went on, with no sign of Bart and Krista, the mystery deepened. Chandler, their son, continued to insist that his parents had gone to their family cabin for the 4th of July weekend. But as authorities dug deeper, things didn't quite add up. His story seemed to change, and some inconsistencies raised questions. His behavior started to seem odd too, with little concern for his missing parents.
Chandler Halderson murdered his parents. It's an important date, and it's an important time to remember. July 1st.
The investigation took a chilling turn when detectives received a tip that led them to a nearby farm. There, they discovered human remains, and the shock of finding these remains was only intensified when it was revealed that they belonged to Bart. Now, the police began to wonder if Chandler's story was more than just a lie. It could be something much darker. The pieces of the puzzle didn't fit together, and suspicions grew that Chandler might be hiding the truth. As the investigation continued, Chandler's narrative started to unravel. What had seemed like a simple case of a missing couple was now looking more like a crime, involving the very person who claimed to be looking for them. The truth was beginning to surface, and Chandler was slowly becoming the prime suspect. As the investigation progressed, Chandler's involvement started to become clearer. The remains found on the farm were confirmed to be his father Bart, but his mother Krista was still missing. Detectives were determined to find her, and a breakthrough came through an unexpected source: Chandler's Snapchat data. It revealed that Chandler had been in a specific area near his favorite swimming hole, a place he often visited. With this new information, authorities focused their search on that location. It was there, hidden in the quiet and remote area, that they made a heartbreaking discovery. Krista's body was found, bringing a tragic end to the search for both of Chandler's parents. The investigators had now uncovered the truth that the son who had been pleading for help in finding his missing parents was the one who had caused their deaths.
We, the jury, find the defendant Chandler M. Halderson guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as to Bart A. Halderson, as charged in count 1 of the amended information.
The discovery of Krista's remains was a devastating moment, and the truth behind the tragic disappearances was now clear. Chandler's lies had been exposed, and the pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, showing the extent of the crime he had committed. Chandler's lies were exposed. It turned out that he had been fabricating stories about his life, including his college attendance and job prospects. In a desperate attempt to cover up his deceit, Chandler murdered both his parents. He was arrested and charged with murder, dismemberment, and hiding the bodies of Bart and Krista.
I have to, for this sentence, ensure that the only time Mr. Halderson comes back into the community is to have the privilege of a burial that he denied his parents.
The case sent shockwaves through the public, as it was a betrayal of the highest order. Chandler's actions left everyone in disbelief. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that the murders were motivated by Chandler's desire to maintain the illusion of success in his life. The jury ultimately convicted him, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Yet he remained emotionless.
Krista Halderson's oldest friend was also in the courtroom. She handed out yellow roses in memory of Bart and Krista. That friend nodded along as prosecution listed their reasons why Chandler Halderson should not be allowed.
The tragic end of Bart and Krista Halderson is a reminder of how deep deception can go, leaving a family and community forever changed.
Unknown type of bullet with the words "get well soon" on it.
Next, we turn to the heartbreaking case of Leilani Simon, a mother whose actions left the world in shock.
Subject of our investigation is the death of little Quinton Simon in Savannah, Georgia. The disappearance of this toddler from his home in 2022 sparked national attention.
Leilani Simon, a Georgia woman, was sentenced to life in prison after being convicted of killing her 20-month-old son, Quinton Simon, and hiding his body in a trash bin. The sentencing followed a month-long trial where Simon was found guilty of malice murder and 18 other charges. It was a quiet October morning in 2022 when the unthinkable happened. Simon, frantic and desperate, called 911, reporting that her young son had vanished from his playpen. The house was eerily still, with no sign of the child. Authorities arrived at the scene and the search began. Days turned into a blur of relentless searching, questioning, and sifting through every possible lead. Despite the efforts of Chatham County Police, led by the determined Chief Jeff Hadley, no trace of the child could be found. As the investigation continued, the mood shifted from one of hope to growing suspicion. The police began to believe that the child was no longer alive. The relentless search seemed to yield no answers, and all the clues pointed towards one unsettling truth. Simon, the mother, was now the prime suspect. The days that followed were filled with intense questioning and investigation, with investigators piecing together a web of details that painted an increasingly dark picture. What had started as a missing child case now seemed to be something far more sinister. Simon's life, once filled with the joy of motherhood, was now overshadowed by the devastating loss of her son and the looming suspicion that she might be responsible for it. For over a month, the investigation into Quinton's disappearance had led police and FBI agents to a local landfill. Days turned into weeks as they sifted through heaps of garbage, their hopes dwindling with each passing hour. But then, amid the refuse, they made a chilling discovery of human bones. The team rushed to confirm their findings, and DNA testing eventually revealed the remains belonged to Quinton. As the case unraveled, the focus shifted to Simon, Quinton's accused killer. During her trial, the cold, calculating nature of her actions became clear. Simon showed no remorse for her crime, a chilling indifference that shocked everyone in the courtroom. Evidence mounted that she had not only implicated innocent people in covering her tracks, but had also continued her life without hesitation, as if nothing had changed.
And does this document include all of them?
Yes, it does.
Before we get into, reading individual ones.
Her lack of empathy painted a clear picture of a person unburdened by guilt or conscience. Simon was convicted of murder, and the truth of her actions came to light, leaving a trail of heartbreak and disbelief in her wake. The investigation and subsequent trial left a permanent mark on everyone involved, a stark reminder of the darkness that can hide behind the most ordinary facades. Leilani Simon was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years for concealing her son's death. During the hearing, prosecutors emphasized her lack of accountability, and the lead detective shared new details, including Simon's actions during the search for her son's body. Simon did not testify, but expressed a desire for her son's remains to be returned to her family.
And now a jury and the public will hear the evidence that hopefully answers all those questions about what happened to little Quinton Simon.
Throughout the proceedings, Simon showed no remorse, which deeply affected the prosecution. But during her mom's interview, when her mom said, "I'm still unsure," when she heard these words, she started crying.
I know drugs has taken and had a huge impact on our entire lives. Even as Leilani's childhood, I failed her as a mom. I allowed addiction to take over my life at a young age.
She was described as being sorry only for getting caught, not for her actions. The emotional impact on Quinton's family was significant, with the judge's decision marking the tragic end of a case that highlighted the devastating loss of a young life. Leilani Simon's case is an unforgettable, tragic tale of darkness. Next is the haunting betrayal of a mother's betrayal of trust.
A Berks County mother was found guilty of killing her 2 young children by hanging them in the basement of their home.
We're very pleased that Lisa Snyder will never see the light of day.
On a September day in 2019 in Albany Township, Pennsylvania, a chilling discovery shocked the community. Lisa Snyder, a mother of 2, was accused of killing her children, 8-year-old Connor and 4-year-old Brinley. The siblings were discovered in a distressing situation in the basement of their home. What unfolded next was a heartbreaking tale of crime, mental health struggles, and justice. Lisa Snyder's story was deeply tragic, as she described how her 8-year-old son, Connor, had been struggling with bullying and feelings of despair. She shared that he had expressed thoughts of harming himself and his younger sister, painting a heartbreaking picture of a boy in emotional pain. However, as investigators continued their work, inconsistencies began to emerge in her account. Surveillance footage from Connor's school bus showed no signs of distress or mistreatment. Teachers and classmates corroborated this, describing Connor as a cheerful, kind child. The physical evidence also didn't align. Connor's small stature would have made it impossible for him to carry out the act Snyder described. Then came the chilling discoveries on Snyder's devices. Investigators uncovered a disturbing series of online searches related to self-harm and seeking information on harmful techniques and even how to kill someone. Snyder had also binge-watched episodes of I Almost Got Away With It, a crime series chronicling stories of people attempting to evade justice. These revelations unraveled the carefully constructed facade. What seemed like a tragedy born of bullying now pointed towards something far more sinister. In December 2019, Snyder was arrested, leaving the community to grapple with the horrifying reality that this was no accident, but a deliberate and calculated crime.
Lisa, why on earth would you want to kill your 2 children?
The courtroom was heavy with tension as Lisa Snyder's trial reached its conclusion in 2024. The defense painted a haunting picture of a troubled woman, overwhelmed by anxiety and depression. They argued that Snyder's mental health struggles could have driven her into a psychotic state during the tragic incident. A psychiatrist testified about her traumatic past, suggesting it might have clouded her judgment, though they emphasized there was no evidence she intended to harm her children.
Told us that it would be extremely difficult for Connor to operate the clasp on the dog leash or to manage to wrap the dog leash.
The prosecution, however, presented a chillingly different narrative. Their expert asserted that Snyder was fully capable of distinguishing right from wrong at the time of the crime. They highlighted damning evidence, her suspicious internet searches, and the calculated circumstances of her children's deaths. These details, they argued, pointed unequivocally to premeditation.
Lisa Snyder was convicted of first-degree murder, endangering the welfare of a child, and evidence tampering. 4-year-old Brinley and 8-year-old Connor.
As closing arguments concluded, the courtroom fell silent. The weight of the case hung over everyone present. All eyes turned to the judge as the verdict was read. Lisa Snyder was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder, child endangerment, and evidence tampering. Gasps and whispers rippled through the room, marking the end of a trial that had dug into the darkest corners of human behavior and left no one untouched.
Taxpayer money to help pay for the defense of this Berks County woman charged with killing her 2 children. 37-year-old Lisa Snyder is considered indigent.
Berks County District Attorney John Adams expressed relief at the outcome, stating, "We are very pleased that Lisa Snyder will never see the light of day and will spend the rest of her life in jail where she belongs." Snyder is now facing a life sentence without the chance of parole. Her sentencing is scheduled for October. The case left a lasting impact on the community and those involved. The tragedy of Connor and Brinley's deaths was compounded by the betrayal of trust from their own mother. While justice has been served, the sorrow and loss felt by the children's loved ones will never truly fade. This story is a sobering reminder of the complexities of mental health and the devastating consequences of unaddressed struggles. Lisa's story is heartbreaking, but what about maternal love, twisted by the devastating grip of postpartum psychosis?
The idea of postpartum depression and psychosis come to play in the criminal justice system. It led Yates to drown her 5 children, one by one.
On June 20th, 2001, Andrea Yates, a Texas mother, committed a tragic act that shocked the nation. In a delusional state driven by postpartum psychosis, she drowned her 5 young children: Noah, 7, John, 5, Paul, 3, Luke, 2, and Mary, 6 months, in the bathtub of their family home in Clear Lake, a Houston suburb. Her husband, Rusty Yates, was at work when the horrific events unfolded. Andrea Yates was described as a loving and caring mother, But after the birth of her fourth child, she had long battled the dark grip of mental illness, and her struggles deepened into a harrowing descent. She faced significant challenges with postpartum depression and psychosis, which deeply impacted her mental health, leading to multiple attempts to take her life. Doctors urged her to stop having more children, warning of the risks, but Andrea and her husband, Rusty, welcomed a fifth baby, Mary, into their family.
Show no apparent hint of turmoil within the Yates home. Andrea Yates was described as a loving mother of 5 who homeschooled her children.
Rusty was cautioned against leaving Andrea alone with the children, but life's demands often found him trusting she would manage. On a fateful day, she was left unsupervised. In the throes of her delusions, Andrea became convinced she was a danger to her children's souls. Twisted by psychosis, she believed her influence would doom them to eternal suffering. In an unthinkable act of distorted love and desperation, she sought to save them. One by one, she took their lives. The tragedy shook the nation, igniting fierce debates about mental health, the burdens of caregiving, and the cracks in the justice system. Andrea's story was one of immense sorrow, raising haunting questions about how society protects its most vulnerable and what happens when it doesn't.
And in many states, including Texas, it's not just that you know.
Andrea was arrested and charged with capital murder. During her trial, her defense argued she was not guilty by reason of insanity, while the prosecution pushed for a life sentence. The case took a dramatic turn when a psychiatrist's false testimony led to her conviction being overturned on appeal. At her 2006 trial, Andrea was found not guilty by reason of insanity and was committed to a mental health facility.
She felt like she had this dilemma of, I love my children, and yet if I don't kill them.
Rusty Yates, deeply affected by the loss of his children, filed for divorce in 2005. He later remarried and had another child, but that marriage also ended in divorce. The trial became a harrowing spectacle, culminating in her conviction. But the story didn't end there. The case took a shocking twist when it was revealed that a psychiatrist's testimony, which had played a key role in her conviction, was false. This revelation overturned the verdict on appeal, giving Andrea another chance to tell her story. At her 2006 trial, a jury found her not guilty by reason of insanity. Instead of prison, she was sent to a mental health facility, a place where she could receive the care she so desperately needed. Meanwhile, Rusty Yates, Andrea's husband, struggled to rebuild his life after the devastating loss of their children. In 2005, he filed for divorce, a painful decision born from heartbreak. Years later, he remarried and welcomed another child, seeking solace in a new chapter. Yet, this second marriage also unraveled, leaving Rusty once again facing the challenges of rebuilding his life amidst lingering sorrow. Their intertwined stories remain a haunting tale of loss, love, and the enduring complexity of the human spirit.
But according to defense attorney George Parnham, Yates is upset.
Very upset, very upset.
Rusty Yates dropped his head in his hands and cried at the verdict.
The tragedy left an indelible mark on everyone involved. Rusty Yates expressed grief, forgiveness, and a longing for understanding. Andrea was a wonderful mother, he said, reflecting on how her mental state drastically altered her behavior. Andrea, meanwhile, remains burdened by guilt, reportedly believing her actions were necessary to save her children from damnation.
And that's, people find that just outrageous, I know, but I don't. I don't blame her one bit.
But the verdict was later overturned, and in a subsequent trial, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. She testified she believed her children's deaths would save their souls.
The case continues to evoke strong emotions and raises critical questions about mental health, parental responsibilities, and the justice system's role in handling such tragedies. Andrea Yates' case describes how tragic mental illness can be. But what happens when a father's story unravels into the chilling case of the disappearance of his young daughter?
Father DeAndre Lane says despite what people may think, he is innocent.
I had nothing to do with my daughter's disappearance. I would never harm my children. My children are my life.
On December 2nd, 2011, DeAndre Lane reported a shocking crime. His 2-year-old daughter, Bianca Jones, had been kidnapped during a carjacking in Detroit. The incident sparked a citywide search and widespread concern. Lane claimed that after leaving Bianca in his car while dropping off his nephew at school, carjackers took the vehicle with Bianca inside. Hours later, the car was recovered, but Bianca was nowhere to be found. Lane's story raised more questions than answers, leaving investigators skeptical. He claimed to be the victim of a carjacking or taken by house owner Patrice, but the pieces of his timeline didn't seem to fit. Bianca, his young daughter, had vanished, and police were unconvinced by his account. He says, "I tried to see if I recognized her, but I didn't. I just saw people coming in and out of my house. I never saw my daughter." They believed a far darker truth lay hidden behind his words.
Tried to see if I could recognize her, but I didn't.
I just saw people coming in and out of a house. I never saw my daughter.
According to authorities, Bianca wasn't taken by a stranger. They suspected she had been killed the night before, during a tragic and terrifying punishment for wetting the bed. The carjacking story, they argued, was a desperate fabrication to mask her death. As they dug deeper, an unsettling detail emerged: a 17-minute gap in Lane's cell phone records. Investigators were certain this was no coincidence. To them, it was the crucial window during which he had disposed of Bianca's body, erasing the evidence of what they believed to be his crime. Lane maintained his innocence, insisting he was a victim, not a perpetrator. But the mounting evidence painted a grim picture. Police and prosecutors were convinced that Lane's story wasn't about a stolen car or a missing child. It was a tale of guilt and concealment, and they were determined to uncover the truth. The trial of Lane captivated everyone, blending emotional testimonies with chilling forensic evidence. Cadaver dogs flown in from Europe uncovered traces of human remains in haunting locations: Bianca's bed and Lane's car. Yet, despite these grim discoveries, Bianca's body was never found, and no witnesses could confirm her death.
Lane is accused of losing his temper with Bianca and beating her with a stick because she pottied on herself.
He was crying or hysterical or whatever for a long time, just and I couldn't get nothing out of him.
Lane, defiant and emotional, stood by his innocence, calling the evidence circumstantial and the accusations unfounded. His defense pointed to gaps in the case, suggesting that assumptions rather than facts painted him as the villain. The plot thickens when reports surface of Bianca being seen alive after her disappearance. A police officer claimed to have spotted her 8 days later during an unrelated call. Months later, a private investigator swore he saw her.
Said anything about me or my child. They came from that table like this. Nobody in that seat said that. You have testimony.
Disguised as a boy, walking in the shadows of anonymity, these accounts cast doubt, weaving intrigue into an already enigmatic case. Despite the unanswered questions and contradictory sightings, the jury delivered its verdict. Lane's face fell, a mixture of disbelief and despair as the gavel struck. Despite all of his accounts, the jury found Lane guilty of Bianca's murder.
Could have changed the outcome of DeAndre's trial.
We had no idea at the time that these two were related or had any kind of connection.
Lane was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He continues to insist on his innocence, pleading with the public to keep searching for his daughter. Bianca's mother, Bianca Jones, also believes her daughter is alive and has called for renewed efforts to locate her. The case leaves a heavy cloud of uncertainty and heartbreak. Lane's words, "No one has evidence that my daughter is dead," resonate deeply with those who doubt the conviction. For others, the lack of closure is haunting. Bianca's mother's hope and Lane's life sentence stand as reminders of a tragedy that continues to raise more questions than answers.
There wasn't a lot to work with. In my mind, I was concerned that despite the evidence, there's no body.
Next, we move to the chilling case of Lisa Dykes, whose actions led to an unimaginable tragedy.
A woman on trial for killing a 23-year-old in a jealous rage may testify today.
Charges against 2 others in the case were dropped. Fox 4's Dan Godwin is live with the latest.
In October 2020, 23-year-old Maricela Botello traveled from Seattle to Dallas for a visit. But her trip took a tragic turn after a night out in Deep Ellum. She vanished, leaving her family and friends desperate for answers. Months later, her body was found in a rural area near Wilmer, Texas, marking the beginning of a harrowing investigation. The tragedy began months later, when investigators discovered her body in a remote area near Wilmer, Texas, unraveling a disturbing tale. The investigation led authorities to Lisa Dykes, her wife Nina Morano, and rapper Charles Beltran. Prosecutors revealed a tragic sequence of events, suggesting that Dykes, overcome by jealousy, attacked Maricela after finding her with Beltran.
Prosecutors say Dykes killed Botello in a jealous rage in October 2020 because she found Botello in bed with her boyfriend.
They claimed the situation escalated into a fatal confrontation. Evidence indicated that Dykes and Morano were working together to conceal the crime, disposing of Maricela's body in a desolate area. While Dykes and Morano were described as being in a unique relationship with Beltran, Dykes denied this, stating her ties to Beltran were limited to supporting his music career.
He says he somewhat lacked family stability, he did not graduate high school, and he was in and out of jail. Now, he says he did not commit this murder of Maricela Botello. He says he was just a witness.
Despite her claims, investigators found messages and GPS evidence connecting her to the crime scene. This heartbreaking case left Maricela's family grieving the loss of a beloved daughter and sister, while justice sought to bring closure to their pain. As the investigation unfolded, prosecutors presented a strong case against Lisa Dykes and Nina Morano. Using GPS data, they showed that both women had been near the rural area where 23-year-old Maricela Botello's body was later found. This evidence directly contradicted Dykes' claim that she and Morano were merely visiting a FedEx distribution center nearby. Adding to the puzzle, text messages and witness testimonies painted a troubling picture of the events leading up to Maricela's tragic death. Prosecutors argued that jealousy and anger had motivated Dykes' actions, providing further evidence to support their claims. In a dramatic twist, after their initial arrest, Dykes and Morano managed to disable their court-ordered ankle monitors and fled the country. They traveled to Cambodia, where they later claimed they were seeking a fresh start and felt unfairly treated. Their escape only heightened the tension surrounding the case, as it raised questions about their motives and accountability. Despite their efforts to evade justice, the legal system caught up with them, ensuring that the tragic loss of Maricela Botello would not go unanswered. Her family continued to grieve her loss while seeking justice for the bright young woman taken too soon.
We, the jury, having heretofore found the defendant, Lisa Jo Dykes, guilty of the offense of murder as charged in the indictment.
After 7 days of testimony and only 90 minutes of jury deliberation, Lisa Dykes was found guilty of murder and tampering with evidence. Her wife, Nina Morano, faced separate charges for her involvement. Dykes showed no emotion as the verdict was read, maintaining her composure as Judge Nancy Mulder delivered the ruling. The prosecution highlighted Dykes' actions as a brutal betrayal of trust, while the defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial and the investigation flawed. But during the whole trial, Lisa didn't show any remorse.
Then dumped her body after she found the 23-year-old in bed with her boyfriend, Charles Beltran, Miss Dykes' boyfriend, Charles Beltran. Maricela was visiting Dallas.
The aftermath of the trial brought a mix of relief and sorrow. Maricela Botello's brother, Luis, delivered a heartfelt victim impact statement, sharing the pain of losing his sister. He said, "She is always taking care of us, despite us losing our sister, a beloved firstborn child, and a confidant." He described the profound impact her death had on their family, especially their mother, who continued to show resilience despite the tragedy.
Taking care of us despite of us losing our sister, their firstborn child. The fact that all of this happened, she hurt herself and my dad.
From a tale of jealousy and betrayal of a girlfriend, we move to a shocking crime that was fueled by a devastating mental health crisis.
She's accused of killing her boyfriend by stabbing him 108 times. And now there is fury over the fact that she has been spared jail time after the judge ruled she was not in control.
In May 2018, a tragic and shocking event unfolded in Thousand Oaks, California, when 32-year-old Brin Speter fatally stabbed her boyfriend, Chad O'Melia, more than 100 times. What initially seemed like a brutal crime turned into a controversial legal battle surrounding mental health and substance-induced psychosis. Brin and Chad had been dating for only a few weeks when tragedy struck on the night of May 27, 2018. The couple was spending time together at Chad's apartment in Thousand Oaks, California. They decided to smoke marijuana, a substance Brin had little experience with. After her first attempt failed to produce any noticeable effect, Chad reportedly encouraged her to try another hit. What followed was a devastating turn of events. Brin began to experience what experts later described as cannabis-induced psychotic disorder. She became disoriented, overwhelmed, and completely out of control. In a haze of confusion, Brin grabbed a serrated bread knife and attacked Chad. By the time the police arrived, the scene was heart-wrenching. Chad lay motionless, and Brin was holding the knife, hysterical and in shock. In her frenzied state, Brin even turned the knife on herself, injuring her neck. Officers acted quickly, using a taser and batons to disarm and restrain her. Chad was pronounced dead at the scene, leaving his family and friends devastated. What began as a quiet evening turned into a moment of unimaginable sorrow, forever altering the lives of everyone involved. The tragic incident quickly gained global attention as Chad's loved ones called for justice, struggling to come to terms with the shocking loss. In the courtroom, prosecutors painted a grim and heartbreaking picture of the events that unfolded. They described the severity of the attack, highlighting the 108 stab wounds Chad suffered as a sign of overwhelming and uncontrollable anger. However, Brin's defense offered a different perspective. They explained that her actions were not intentional, but rather the result of a rare mental health crisis. Experts testified that Brin had experienced what is known as a cannabis-induced psychotic disorder, a condition triggered by her reaction to marijuana that night. They described how her mental state at the time left her unable to understand what was happening or control her actions.
And as I got closer to him, I saw the knife in my left hand stab his abdomen. And then it just went black.
The case left many torn. On one side, Chad's family sought accountability for the devastating loss of their son and brother. On the other hand, Brin's legal team pleaded for understanding, emphasizing the role her mental health played in the tragedy. The courtroom became a place of emotional testimony and difficult questions, as everyone grappled with how such an unthinkable event could have happened. After years of legal proceedings, a jury convicted Brin of involuntary manslaughter. In January 2024, Judge David Worley sentenced her to 2 years of probation and 100 hours of community service instead of prison. This decision, which acknowledged her cannabis-induced psychosis, sparked strong reactions. Chad's father, Sean O'Melia, voiced his outrage, claiming the ruling set a dangerous precedent, saying, "He just gave everyone in the state of California who smokes marijuana a license to kill someone."
I'm just so sorry that he went through that pain.
Yeah, it's
I don't know.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
In her testimony, that everything was about her.
Brin and her family wept in relief after the judge's decision, while Chad's loved ones were left devastated, feeling justice had not been served. The public also went on roads for justice. The case highlighted the complex interplay between mental health, substance use, and criminal responsibility, leaving the community divided over whether Brin's punishment fit her crime.
Brin moved to Los Angeles to start her career as an audiologist, her hearing service dog, Aria, by her side. The two spent much of their free time.
Brin's case highlights the complexities of mental health and justice. The next case shows how volatile relationships spiraled into tragedy.
Loved each other deeply, and they fought with the same level of intensity. And when one of them ends up dead, police have to decide if it was self-defense or premeditated murder.
On a quiet September night in 2015, Kaylee Whitehall and her boyfriend, Custon Johnson, were embroiled in a heated argument at their shared home in Kentucky. The confrontation would end in tragedy, leading to a criminal case that captivated the community and revealed the dark undercurrents of a troubled relationship. The argument began when Custon Johnson learned that Kaylee Whitehall planned to leave him. What started as a heated exchange quickly escalated into chaos, with their disagreements spreading throughout the house. Witnesses later described a tumultuous scene where emotions ran high. During the altercation, Johnson reportedly placed Whitehall in a headlock, attempting to control the situation. In response, Whitehall threw objects in an effort to free herself. The tension mounted as the conflict continued to spiral out of control.
I couldn't breathe and I felt like I was scared.
Amid the confusion, Whitehall made a critical decision. She grabbed a knife and returned to confront Johnson in the bedroom. What happened next changed both of their lives forever. In the midst of the struggle, Whitehall stabbed Johnson. Wounded and disoriented, Johnson managed to make his way to the bathroom, but his injuries were too severe. He collapsed near the shower, unable to recover from the damage inflicted. Tragically, his life slipped away shortly after. The devastating moment marked the tragic end of their relationship and set the stage for a courtroom battle that would later determine Whitehall's fate. It was a heartbreaking reminder of how conflicts can escalate with irreversible consequences. In the midst of the dispute, Whitehall stabbed Johnson. Injured and bleeding, he stumbled into the bathroom, collapsing near the shower. Tragically, Johnson succumbed to his wounds shortly after. The case reached the courtroom in September 2015, as the tragic events of that fateful day were laid bare before a jury. Prosecutors described the incident as an act of reckless violence, pushing back against Whitehall's claim of self-defense. Brittany Jones, a key witness, shared her account of what happened. She explained how she tried to step in and separate the couple during their heated argument, but was unable to calm the situation. She also testified to seeing Whitehall pick up a knife and return to the bedroom where Johnson was, a moment that would later prove pivotal in the case. Prosecutor Kim Gogegan presented a strong argument, emphasizing that Whitehall's actions didn't align with a narrative of self-defense. Detectives who investigated the crime scene further strengthened the prosecution's case. They revealed that the evidence contradicted Whitehall's initial claim of stabbing Johnson in the kitchen while he was holding her. Instead, the findings pointed to the fatal act occurring in the bedroom.
I've never been in any situation like this. I don't do it, and I've never been arrested. I go to work every day. I'm like a supervisor. I'm in church. Like, my life is perfect.
The jury listened carefully to these details, piecing together the story of what had happened. It was a tragic moment that left the courtroom grappling with questions of accountability and the choices that led to such a devastating outcome. After a 3-day trial, the jury found Whitehall guilty of reckless homicide. On November 7th, Warren Circuit Judge Steve Wilson upheld their recommendation of a 4-year sentence. Whitehall, who had remained stoic throughout the trial, returned to custody to continue serving her time at the Warren County Regional Jail.
Motion phase penalty. We, the jury, fixed the defendant's sentence of reckless homicide.
Under the terms of her sentence, Whitehall is eligible for parole after serving 15% of her term, which means she could be released as early as March. This case brought heartbreak to both families involved and served as a stark reminder of how quickly domestic disputes can escalate into irreversible tragedies. Prosecutors argued that Johnson's life ended senselessly, while Whitehall maintained her actions stemmed from fear. Kaylee Whitehall's tragic crime leads to a heartbreaking loss. Next is a mysterious death that has sparked allegations of conspiracy.
And the Massachusetts Supreme Court is weighing arguments over whether to dismiss Karen Reed's murder charges. Reed is accused of hitting her police officer boyfriend with her SUV and leaving him to die.
Karen Reed stands accused of killing her police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe, in a mysterious and tragic incident. O'Keefe, a Boston police officer with a 16-year career, was found dead in the front yard of another officer's house in January 2022. Reed, his girlfriend, has claimed her innocence, alleging that law enforcement is trying to frame her for his death. The case took an unexpected twist when a 9-week trial ended in a mistrial because the jury couldn't agree on a verdict. Karen Reed faced serious charges, including second-degree murder, motor vehicle manslaughter, and leaving the scene of a deadly accident. The prosecution was determined to try again, pledging to retry Reed for her role in the tragic death of her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe.
They arrived at the victim's home. The defendant had Ms. McCabe looked at that same cracked taillight. Ms. McCabe described the passenger side right rear taillight as cracked.
However, Reed's defense team argued that she was being unfairly accused. They claimed that law enforcement officers, some of whom were closely connected to the victim, were involved in a conspiracy to frame her for his death. The defense painted a picture of a complicated situation, suggesting that there were many unanswered questions surrounding O'Keefe's death, and that Reed's actions had been misunderstood.
To move her murder retrial to a later date. Reed is charged in connection with the death of her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe.
As the case continues, the mystery deepens, with both sides presenting strong arguments. Reed insists she's innocent and is determined to clear her name, while O'Keefe's family and friends search for justice. The courtroom remains a place of tension as everyone hopes the truth will eventually come to light and bring resolution to this heartbreaking situation. The night of John O'Keefe's death started like any other, but tension had been growing in his relationship with Karen Reed. After a disagreement at a bar, Reed dropped O'Keefe off at an after-party, unaware that this would be their last night together. The next morning, Reed discovered his body outside the home of Brian Albert, a retired Boston police sergeant.
And I would note, the Commonwealth's characterization of that interview is incorrect and incomplete. I submitted additional reporting from Boston 25.
Investigators found clues linking Reed's vehicle to the scene, including a broken taillight and traces of O'Keefe's DNA on the car. The evidence suggested that Reed's SUV might have been involved in the incident, raising questions about what happened that night. However, Reed's defense team argued that O'Keefe's death could have been the result of a violent altercation at the after-party. They suggested that other people at the gathering, including Albert and his family, might have played a role. During the whole trial, Karen was just smiling as she knew that everything would be in his favor.
The judge denied the defense request to bring the jurors back to court to find out if they actually reached verdicts on those 2 counts. And now the Massachusetts Supreme Court will make a decision.
The defense painted a picture of a chaotic situation where the truth was unclear and no one really knew what had happened. As the investigation continues, the search for answers grows more complicated, with both sides trying to piece together the events leading up to that fateful morning. Despite the evidence presented by the prosecution, Reed's defense argued that the investigation was biased, particularly due to the close relationships between some of the key figures involved, including Albert's ties to law enforcement.
The sneaker was completely buried. It wasn't until we started digging through the snow that we found the sneaker.
Was a clear piece of plastic found a few feet south?
They claimed that Reed was unfairly targeted as a suspect. The judge denied a request to dismiss the charges, and a retrial has been scheduled for April 1st. Throughout the trial, Reed maintained her innocence, while O'Keefe's family and friends sought justice for his death. The case has left many questioning whether the right person is on trial, and whether justice can truly be served in such a complicated and emotionally charged situation.
You alone determine what evidence to believe. You determine the facts of this case.
The actions of these family members shattered families, and their chilling lack of remorse in court left the world horrified. From betrayal for money to unthinkable acts of violence, These cases show just how cruel and heartless people can be. The next video takes you deeper into the sinister motives and tragic outcomes of family killers.